If today you hear his voice, harden not your heart. Alleluia, alleluia, hallelujah. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Some of the scribes and Pharisees said to Jesus, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." He said to them in reply, "An evil and unfaithful generation seeks a sign, but no sign will be given it, except the sign of Jonah, prophet. Just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. At the judgment, the men of Nineveh will arise with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And there is something greater than Jonah here. At the judgment, the queen of the south will arise with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And there is something greater than Solomon here." The Gospel of the Lord. I want to make a couple of comments this morning about the readings. First of all, I know I've mentioned this before, but just continue to point these things out to you. In our modern age, it's very easy to become disbelieving about stories of the Scriptures, and especially with modern scholars. They tend to question many of the stories in the Bible. And one of those most common stories that might be disbelieved is the story of Jonah. I mean, come on, it's so incredulous. How can you possibly believe that a man was eaten by a fish and survived? And yet, here in the Gospel of Matthew, we have Jesus himself speaking about this very event of Jonah. Even though there are many modern Christians who might want to question some of those stories of the Old Testament, most of us don't want to question Jesus himself. And yet Jesus himself, on various occasions, spoke about the story of Jonah. Apparently Jesus believed in the story of Jonah, so I think we should too. Right? We just need to keep pointing those things out to you as we keep going through these biblical texts. Also, I want to speak a little bit about this story from the book of Exodus. We kind of skipped over a lot of important parts here. We went basically from chapter 3 to chapter 12, and now we're in chapter 14. And in the midst of that, we skipped over Moses' whole interaction with Pharaoh and the 10 plagues of Egypt. Most of us are familiar with these 10 plagues. And I remember when I was younger, I used to always wonder, why did God choose those plagues in particular? What was so significant about the frogs and the gnats and the boils and the cattle and the Nile River being turned into blood? What was the significance of those things? Apparently I wasn't alone in this. This is something that people have asked for a long time. And one of the advantages of modern scholarship in the Bible is that there's been many different archaeological discoveries in the recent centuries. And there's actually been a pretty big increase in knowledge of the ancient world of Egypt by means of archaeology. And it sheds some light on this story from the book of Exodus. What modern archaeologists have discovered is the various gods that were worshipped in ancient Egypt. And it just so happens that many of the ancient gods they worshipped are the very same things that are targeted by the plagues of God against Pharaoh in Egypt. For example, one of the gods that was worshipped was god of the frogs, right? And so this plague with the increase of frogs in Egypt was like God mocking the Egyptian worship of that god. We also know, you've probably heard of this god, the god Ra, right? The god of the light, or the god of the sun. So when God, in the second to last plague, sends darkness over all of Egypt, again, it was symbolic that he was conquering the god of the sun, establishing darkness throughout the land. Maybe the most striking one is the Nile River, when God turned the Nile into blood. And the Nile was one of the great things that was worshipped in Egypt. And so when God not only directed a plague against the Nile River, but literally turned it into blood, what does that look like? It's God striking the god of the Nile and making him shed blood. Right? Then, of course, in the New Testament, we have the beautiful reversal of this, of Jesus, like the first plague of Egypt, was turning water into blood. So Jesus, in his first miracle in his public ministry at the wedding of Cana, turned water into wine, which was a foreshadowing of the fact that he would eventually turn wine into his own blood for us. Right? That's the significance of these plagues in Egypt. It is God establishing his authority, showing the people of the world that no matter what gods they decide to worship, he is always stronger. And he will strike those false and empty religions and those empty gods, because he himself is a warrior and he fights for his people, as we heard in the responsorial psalm today.